Welcome to Last Neanderthals podcast. My name is Khushal Yusufzai.
And my name is Wali Khan. You may not know us yet, but that doesn't really matter. All you need to know is we are the Last Neanderthals. We are dedicated to having interesting and engaging conversations with individuals who have a lot of experience and an immense amount of knowledge. We hope to learn from these people and grow as human beings. We want you to listen and grow with us too. So come along the journey and evolve with us.
In today's episode, we spoke to Wajeeha Amir. Wajeeha is a very hardworking and talented student, and despite all odds, she stayed resilient through many obstacles in Peshawar, Pakistan to get her education. She managed to study at LUMS, a very prestigious university in Pakistan, and is currently doing masters at University of Oxford. She managed to get a scholarship from Oxford Pakistan program, which is a huge achievement. In our conversation, Wajeeha shares with us her journey of achieving such an amazing accomplishment. She also shared what it's like to be a woman in a patriarchal society. And also, Wajeeha opened up about the traumatic experience of the APS school shooting. We hope that you find this conversation as inspiring as we did. If you're a student who aspires to do great things in their academic journey, then this is the perfect podcast for you. I hope you enjoy it, and thank you so much for listening.
I don't think there are words that can capture what happened that day.
How did you feel when the attack happened on the boys' army public school?
It was just devastating.
Parents, many still unaware of the full scale of the unfolding tragedy, rushed to the school. As did the military. Ultimately, they killed the gunmen, but failed to prevent the massacre.
It was a very big traumatic experience. It was very hard to make sense of what had happened. I was surprised by how brave everybody was. The first day that the school reopened, everybody was back. Everybody was grieving, but at the same time, they were determined to do what they wanted to do.
And then you managed to earn a scholarship.
When they told me that I've got the scholarship, that's when I just randomly went out to my parents and I was like, I might be going to Oxford this year. Immediately, all of that started hitting me as well, that, I'll be away from home. And I need to pack and I need to, figure out everything.
What advice would you give to a young Wajeeha who aspires to do great things like yourself?
But I feel like
So you said you grew up in Peshawar, right?
Mm-hmm.
Were you born there as well?
Yep, I was born in Peshawar and I've been living there pretty much my whole life except the time that I moved away for a bit for my undergrad and now for my master's. But other than that, I've been there for the whole time.
What was it like growing up in Peshawar?
That's a pretty broad question.
Yeah.
So I think it depends on what aspect of my life I look at. So for instance, personally, I think it's been great because we have it's a small town, so it's a very close-knit community. That also has its cons, of course, because everybody knows everyone. But I think it's also nice to have that kind of community. If you look at it from maybe a more professional angle, I think it's not so good because the job opportunities are really limited. That's something I discovered after my undergrad. Even during my undergrad, when I started looking for internships, because I was doing my undergrad outside of Peshawar, where internships were pretty common, like they are in the UK as well, for instance. There wasn't so much of a trend of internships in Peshawar. So when I was back home for the break, I started looking for internships and I found out there was basically nothing. The idea of internships in Peshawar was that when you graduate, when you're done with your undergrad, then you go and you get an internship and it pays abysmally low. It's very exploitative. And there were basically no opportunities for people who are still doing their undergrad. And then even after I did my undergrad, I think I was lucky enough that I did find a job at a very good place and I had a very good experience over there. But generally looking at the job market, there are not a lot of opportunities for young people, and a lot of young people in Peshawar at this time around my age, they're moving out increasingly. They're living on their own in other cities because there are not a lot of job opportunities. And then I think obviously if when I think back to my childhood, it was not the best place to grow up in because of the terrorism, that the war on terror that was going on around 2010. So I was maybe like 11, 12 back then. So I think that was a very difficult time, which I realize now, because at that time when we were children, that was just what the norm was for us. That was normal for us. And sometimes when I think back to it now, I realize how abnormal it is, and I realize how crazy it is. And I think I'm just now also beginning to realize the impact that it had on me, on all of us, all of the people who were all of the people who were there at the time, but especially people who were so young at the time and they had to live in that kind of environment. So I think it's just only now that I'm beginning to realize the impact that it had, but it was not an easy place to live in. The terror was very real. I think you would fear for your life, but more than that, you'd fear for the lives of your loved one. Whether it was just doing something as simple as going to school, going to work, it was always like a thought that was at the back of your mind, and you never truly felt like you were safe. And that aspect, I think, continues to the day, not just because of the terrorism, but also because of the way the environment is over there more generally, especially for women. So, when you're going out, you don't feel that kind of security and safety that you would want to feel in your hometown, especially, I think. So that was missing.
Do you think that is slightly changing and getting better in Pakistan, or do you think it might even be getting worse, the aspect of like being able to leave your house as a woman and feeling safe and secure?
I think that's a difficult question because, especially as a social scientist, I feel like it's very hard for me to make a yes or no statement. So I think it does depend on where you're from, the region, the class that you're from. I think that's a big, big factor. I think generally it might be improving. So there is an increasing trend of women for studying, going out of town for studying, going out of town to work. But I think it's still not as normalized as you'd like it to be. And even for the women, there is an increasing number of women who are doing so, but for them, it's not easy. Like that's for sure. So there might be more women doing it, but that doesn't mean that it's gotten better necessarily. And they do still face a lot of problems. So I think, it's hard to just say yes or no. I think I do hope it's getting better. It might be, but I don't want to sort of just discount the problems that women are actually facing.
Yeah, exactly.
Is it more of a social pressure, or is the system completely not in their favor when women are trying to get higher education or trying to get a job?
I think it's both. So at least because I've only lived in Peshawar really, so I know over there is still a social pressure, and again, it does depend on where you're from, what family, what class. But I think there is a general social pressure where even maybe it's getting better now in the sense that it might be normal for most women. Again, depends on the class though, but it is generally like considered normal for a woman to continue her education. But that doesn't mean that the pressure is not there. And usually the education is up to a limited point, and it's taken as more of a thing that you do to pass your time until you're ready to be married, maybe. And similarly, your career is something that you can continue as a hobby, but it's not what's supposed to be your primary goal in life. And if you end up getting married, then that should take priority. So there are these kind of mindsets that are still there. So the social pressure is definitely very real. But I think there's also a systemic bias. So the systems, the infrastructure, the cities, they're designed in a way that it makes it much more difficult for women to do these things. So something as simple as transport, our public transport system is not the best. It's barely there. Like we just got like the first major, the metro line in Peshawar is pretty recent, right? Before that, we didn't have something like that. But even now it's there, but it's very limited. And then, for instance, if you're a woman who does not have access to a private car, then you have to take public transport. So, there's a question of, even if you do, let's say, take the metro, which is again limited, but like, how do you get to that station? How do you go to your destination from the station? Because even the public transport system is designed for men and for the kind of journeys that they tend to take, not for the kind of travel that women need to do. And then, outside of that, let's say one metro line, there's nothing else, right? The existing transport system is very bad. So basically every aspect of the city and then the system as well is, I think, designed against women. And that's going to take a lot of time to change.
So at what point did you decide that you wanted to pursue a career and you wanted to pursue higher education?
Right. So I think even though Peshawar is a very patriarchal society, and I also come from a very conventional family, but I did have the privilege of growing up in a family where it was not very odd or uncommon. In fact, it was considered the usual thing for women to at least go up until a certain level education wise, and so that was the norm for me as well. But when I started school, I think I did well academically from the start, and that's something that really helped me personally, because that ended up giving me a lot more freedom than others around me had, because I was performing well, and so everyone thought that, oh, she's someone we can trust. So I think for me it ended up becoming sort of an obvious choice because I was performing well and everybody was happy with that performance. They saw the sort of opportunities that it could open up. It was like becoming obvious to everyone in real time. So I think, I think it ended up becoming the obvious choice in a way.
And did you always know that you wanted to like pursue something in social sciences, or did that come later?
Oh no, that came way later, because in Peshawar, in that region, in Pakistan in general as well, even till this date, there's this very strong idea for some reason that there are certain professions that are respectable and that you should pursue and that will give you a good life, and the rest are just they're not worth it,
It's
right?
just if you're not a doctor,
Yeah.
engineer, or a lawyer,
Yeah.
you're a failure.
And it's crazy because it still persists to this day in Peshawar. And maybe at one point it did make sense, but now it doesn't. Like, the sector is so saturated, the competition is really tough, and it's just common sense that not everybody is made to be a doctor, right? Like, not everybody can have the same skill set. It's just common sense, but that's just how they treated us. So even at school, I did my FSC, which is like 11th and 12th grade. I studied pre-medicine because even I think up until that point, I was probably thinking of becoming a doctor, because that's what I had heard as a child, like throughout my life, especially as I mentioned, because I did well academically. So it was just the obvious choice that you should become a doctor. In fact, like when I chose not to go down that path, a lot of people told me that I'm just, wasting my life, wasting my potential. So it wasn't an easy choice. But I think around like the 11th and 12th grade, as I was studying pre-medicine already, I started realizing that this is not what I want to do. And it was very confusing because I didn't have a lot of guidance. So in schools, in Peshawar, most schools, especially public schools, career counseling is not really a concept. There's no such thing as that. And you don't have a lot of people around you who can guide you and who can tell you about other options. So even in the school, in the society, the role models that you're presented are, doctors, or maybe I think increasingly also civil servants a lot of times. So, you don't know what your options are. And so it was actually like, I think, a bit of a gamble, honestly, because I didn't know what I was getting into. But when I tried researching, I tried looking up, there were I remember like one orientation session in our at our college from the university that I then ended up going to. But other than that, it was basically up to ourselves to find out what's out there. So I think when I started looking, I thought that this is something that I'm interested in and it might be a good option. But yeah, I think so. It was maybe around the 11th grade when I actually thought of going down this path. Until then, it was just, become a doctor, become a dentist. That's pretty much it. And that's also what I was studying until that point.
So what actually made you change your mind that you wanted to go into more policy and social science type of subject rather than your traditional medicine lawyer?
Um, so I think when I was trying to figure it out, again, I didn't know what options were available to me. I had no way of really knowing what fields out there, what fields are out there, what careers are out there. I didn't know all of that. I didn't have anyone to guide me about that. But I figured, like, okay, the simplest thing I can do is try to see what I'm interested in right now,
Hmm.
what interests me the most, and that actually turned out to be like, um, well, we didn't have really any social science subjects except for Pakistan studies, which is debatable about how good that is
Mm.
and how accurate and factual that is. But nevertheless, I think I found that more interesting than like other subjects. Just the idea of, I think just the fact that it gave us more room to think and to debate. It wasn't as stringent as other subjects. So I think I like that fact. Before that, in like secondary school, we'd had, history at some point, um, maybe even like social studies at some point. So I think I tried to figure out a pattern and realized that I was more interested in those subjects. And I think that's how I ended up making the decision.
Yeah, that's quite relatable to me as well because my mother is a doctor, my father is a doctor, and my brother is a doctor as well. So my career path was also meant to be, oh, he's going to be a doctor as well. But then I was just like, this is not what I want to do. I'm not passionate about it. Obviously, it's a great profession, great career for everyone who does do it. But for me, it just wasn't right. So yeah, making that decision was quite difficult. Like, okay, actually, I want to pursue something else. And it helped that my dad transitioned from being a doctor into politics because then he had that experience of, okay, you don't just have to be a doctor in life, you can do other things as well. So it's quite a relatable story. But I want to take it back a bit. So you said it was dangerous growing up in Peshawar at the time. And you went to the army public school in Peshawar, right? So
Girls one, I think.
yeah, the girls one. What was? How did you feel when the attack happened on the boys' army public school in Peshawar?
So I think I started studying at the Army Public School, APS, from a very young age. And so we first went to the junior branch where we studied. It was up till the fifth grade. It was like co-education. So we studied with some of the boys who ended up going to the boys' school, and then we shifted to the girls' school after fifth grade. Um, and it was, like I said, Peshawar in general is also a very close knit community, but particularly within those schools, because so a lot of like my friends had siblings there, some people had parents there, so like we knew a lot of the people over there already, um, and it was, yeah, I don't think there are words that can capture the what happened that day or the feelings that we had as a result, because I think it was just devastating. Um, but I also feel like it was a culmination of what had been going on. And like I said before, we considered that normal, so it was just normal for us to live in that sort of environment. But when this happened, it sort of, changed something in a way, because it just made everybody realize that what we'd been going through was not okay, and like, sort of we've had enough kind of point. And we did had some positive policy changes at that point, which unfortunately we didn't follow up with. Um, but I think it was, yeah, it was like a culmination of all of the things that had been going on. And I think I still remember that day in like vivid detail, and where we were, what happened afterwards. But I think what I've also realized is that it was a very big traumatic experience that at the time again wasn't treated as such. And only when I started talking about it more as I grew up, I started realizing the impact it had on me and realizing what we actually went through.
What
So
kind of impact would you say it had on you?
I think personally it was a very difficult period. Like I remember there was a time like right after the attack when I just because our schools shut down for like a month or so. And I think those were like the worst vacations of my life because I would have nightmares, and it was just a very weird, surreal time living through those days, because we didn't even have school, so we didn't have anything to do, and we were just left alone in our home trying to like make sense of what had happened, and we were all pretty young, right? So it was a very difficult time. It was very hard to make sense of what had happened and to just like try to process that tragedy, I think. So, like, right after the attack, when we were in school, they didn't really tell us what happened. At first, they tried to like hide it as much as possible, and then I remember we were supposed to have our break time, but they canceled it, which had never happened before. They just sent us back to our classes, and then they started like the next lecture. And meanwhile, they were actually like calling everybody's parents and asking them to pick us. And then even when we were going home, we didn't really know the extent of what had happened. We just heard very like bits and pieces. So like, oh, there's been a shooting. And I remember like a lot of us were thinking of what could have happened. And the most that we could think of was that, oh, maybe a boy bought a gun. Maybe there was a fight, because we just heard there had been a shooting. And that's about it. But then we heard, I think the first thing that we heard was like one person had been killed or something of that sort. And that really, confused us, because we didn't understand what's happening. And that was suddenly like, oh, somebody bought a gun, but then, oh, someone's been killed. And then, very slowly, we started picking up rumors and whispers from here and there that, oh, there's been an attack. But again, we had no idea about the extent of it. But before we went home, I remember like people who had family there, they started calling. And in retrospect, it just feels very weird, like, thinking that, wondering if that was the last call, wondering if people who were there, did they ever see the call? Was it too late? You don't know what happened, right? But I think the biggest shock came to me, at least, when I entered home right after this. They picked us up early, and the moment I entered home and I read what was written on the TV, and it was just, it was earth shattering, because suddenly it was like, I think the count at that time was pretty low compared to what actually had happened, because it was like the early time in the day. So it was maybe like 20, 30, and just reading that was like, it was unbelievable, honestly. We couldn't comprehend it. So then, I remember like the whole day we spent glued to the TV screen, just watching the count go up. And I remember like my friends, everybody was constantly online trying to text each other and, asking about each other's families, but also like, um, there were like constant updates coming up, like, oh, do you remember this guy? He was killed. And we were just like, constant chain of just everybody texting each other, updates like that. And then, like the whole week after, I remember I didn't know what to do. And I think I just like, there was a period when I just stopped talking because I didn't know what to say. And I remember my family was also a bit concerned. And then I think my grandfather gave me like this whole lecture about how, just how death is written whenever it is and that kind of thing. But I think despite all of that, we didn't really get an opportunity to process it, especially someone like me who was at a distance from it, right? But when I started speaking about it more growing up, I think that's when I realized that it was, the impact that it had on me emotionally. Like I remember the first time that I actually spoke about it out loud, I just broke down. It was in my undergraduate university, and it was actually a memorial. And because I was from the city and from the school, so they asked me if I wanted to speak, and I ended up speaking. And that was the first time I actually talked about it out loud. And it was a public event, but I just broke down. And in that moment, I remember feeling really confused because I didn't realize that I had so many feelings that were still like unpacked. And I think it's honestly gonna still take a very long time to process not just that, but like the entire period that we lived through. And even now, like sometimes when we're just like, I'm with my friends from Peshawar, or other people in Peshawar, and it's crazy that we chat about, we laugh about those times, and how, oh, we're passing by and there was a blast nearby, or oh, remember that blast where our windows broke, and that kind of thing. It's normal for us. But now, when we're like growing up, we're starting to realize what we went through, I guess.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it feels almost surreal, like it didn't actually happen. But what was it like when you then went back into school? Were you frightened at all?
um yeah, I think I was. But it was more like yes and no, because part of me was frightened for sure, but again, we had been living in that sort of environment for a few years anyway, so it wasn't exactly something new. Even though obviously this was much much closer to home. But I think I was surprised by how brave everybody was despite this. So for instance, like my own family has been very protective, but when the schools reopened, there was no question of, oh, whether we should go back here or not. There was no conversation of, changing schools, or like maybe you should go later, anything of that sort. And I remember the first day that the school reopened, everybody was back. And we had our first morning assembly. So, part of us was afraid of, like, just all of us gathering in one place and that kind of thing, because you constantly had those kind of intrusive thoughts. But everybody was back. Um, and so I think that's also like the point where I realized that, even though I don't like using this word, and I don't like the fact that we have to be, but the resilience of our community, I think it was amazing. Like everybody was back, um everybody was grieving, but at the same time they were back, and they were, ready to they were determined to do what they wanted to do, despite everything. And I think that was amazing.
Yeah, that is very powerful. And so then obviously moving from that, you went to university in Pakistan as well for your undergraduate. What was that experience like at LUMS, I think it was, right?
Hmm. Yeah, so I did my undergraduate at LUMS, which is the Lahore University of Management Sciences, and it's, I think, one of the top institutions in the country. Um, but it's also a very elite institution, which also tells you something about our education system. Um, so I think it was a mixed experience. I think it was very wonderful in terms of the career prospects that it opened up for me, in terms of everything that I learned, because it was a new field for me, but also generally, I think it was a very rewarding experience. I think the professors were wonderful, the classes were great. But then, because at the same time it was a very elite institution, so it also sort of made me realize what we had been missing out on. Um, so, academically, professionally, socially, the life in Peshawar is very different. And so, even though like LUMS is within Pakistan, but it was quite a bit of a cultural shock just going there and seeing how the youth over there is, and what their lives are like, and how it's so different from ours. And again, that was also like, it had its ups and downs, because we got to live a little bit of that life as well. Socially also, I think there was a bit more freedom, because like, it was a big community, so it was like, the experience of just going out, being able to walk nearby, even though again, not that it's still a very pedestrian friendly area or city at all, but just like, that kind of experience I'd never had. But then at the same time, just always feeling like almost this grief of the fact that you never got to experience these kind of opportunities, and that that so many people are home are still deprived of this. um yeah, I think that was, yeah.
So, what was the biggest difference between your secondary education, like your lower education, and then LUMS? What was the missing ingredient that LUMS had, but your schools didn't?
I think there was a lot of it, honestly. I don't think I can pick like one thing. um so even like academically, if I look at it, I think LUMS was much better, obviously. Even though I had different fields in both systems, but even then, I think the secondary education system in Peshawar, maybe even the undergraduate at some places, it's very, very focused on just how you test. It's very exam focused. It's all about your grades. It's all about that. It's not holistic at all. It's yeah. It's just, the purpose of that education is just that you get a good grade on your exam. Um, in LUMS, it was still somewhat, there was still a good emphasis, it's pretty like heavy emphasis on grades, but I think it was still more holistic. And then there were so many extracurricular activities that you could be part of, which allowed you to build on your other skills as well, which I think I really missed out on in Peshawar. So over there, extracurricular activities were considered like a waste of time, or something that, okay, maybe the students need a bit of a break, but that's about it. They were never taken seriously. They were never considered as avenues that you could use to build, like, your speaking skills, your interpersonal skills. There was no concept of anything like that. In LUMS, there were like a lot of opportunities to participate in like any extracurricular that you wanted. There was a lot of societies of every different things. If you're interested in science, if you're interested in journalism, you could just go down whatever path you liked, and you could continue that interest besides your study. So I think that was a really nice opportunity, and I think that was one big difference, I guess.
And then you managed to earn a scholarship through the Oxford Pakistan program to study at Oxford. So what was that whole experience like signing up for that? How did that work?
Signing off for what? Sorry.
Getting the scholarship from the Oxford Pakistan program. Did you sign up for that? Did they get in contact with you? How did that happen?
Yes, I think I hadn't applied to any university before, but I had applied to a couple of scholarships before. In fact, like right before graduating, I'd applied to the Rhodes Scholarship, and I didn't know about it. I just happened to come across it, I think, on social media, and I just thought, oh, I fit the criteria, so maybe I should sign up. But then when I researched a bit more, I realized that how exclusive it was and how prestigious it was. And so I decided to not apply at first because I never thought I could make it. And I never thought someone like me could make it, if that makes sense. Even though I was at that point studying at a place like LUMS, but I felt like I had a big disadvantage in terms of like my previous education. So I didn't even do OA levels. I did my metric in FSC. And then I felt like a lot of people in LUMS, they had been preparing for this their whole lives. They knew what the process was like. They knew how it works. They knew, what volunteering opportunities to get and what internships to get to build your profile. And I had none of that. So I almost didn't apply. But then what actually prompted me in the end to apply was that there was a girl from Peshawar who had been a Rhodes Scholar a few years before. And when I found that out, I thought, okay, maybe I can apply as well. And so I did end up being a finalist, and I was, I think, one of the like 8 or 9 people in the country. And I think that was the first time where I realized that this is something I could do. And so while I started working after that, I applied to Oxford then just last year in 2023. And then I got my acceptance in, I think, March. And I didn't tell anyone I applied. I had like nobody in my family knew.
It's crazy. So you kept it a secret the whole time.
And when I got my acceptance, I still didn't tell anyone.
Why?
How long did you keep it a secret for as well?
So because I knew that I had to wait for a scholarship decision, because otherwise I won't be able to go. And I think I was also trying to keep my own expectations low, because I knew that if I didn't get like a full scholarship, there was no way I could go. So I didn't want to get anybody's hopes up, and I didn't want to get my own hopes up, so I didn't tell anyone. And then I think I had applied to OPP myself, because again, I'd seen about it. I think they were just starting out a few months before that. So I'd heard about it, and I applied to it. I got in touch with some of the previous scholars who I think were incredibly kind to help me out with the application process. But I just like randomly hit them up on LinkedIn. And so I was just like, sort of secretly working on my own on all of this. So I think it was around June when I had the interview. And I think I found out later that month. And when they told me that I've got the scholarship, that's when I just randomly went out to my parents and I was like, I might be going to Oxford this year.
Oh my! How was their reaction like?
I think, yeah, it was. They're just like very confused and very excited at once. Because I obviously told them that, I got a scholarship, which is why I'm going. So they were just like, okay, when did this happen? And it was already like the end of June, so I had to leave in like a couple of months.
Wow.
Yeah, but I think it was an amazing experience.
How did you feel when you finally got the acceptance from the scholarship?
I think for me also it was hard to believe because it was a very big thing, and it was also big in the sense that it was a big change, right? Like I knew that I now have to go and I have to move.
That realization.
Yeah.
It was
it's
me
just-
with Kings as well. Once I failed, then when I got in, I was like, oh no, I have to actually maintain this now.
Yeah, and I think I was very happy, but at the same time, because like you said, I knew I had to go, so immediately like all of that started hitting me as well, that I'll be away from home, and I need to pack and I need to figure out everything. So I think it was a pretty wild experience.
That's such a mature response as well. If it was like me and you, as soon as we got the thing from Oxford, we'd be telling everyone.
Telling everyone. Even like, just at the beginning, right?
Yeah,
when nothing
right
is
at the
settled. That's so
start.
selfless of you. I'm
Yeah.
quite impressed.
It is very impressive.
I'll
to
be going
honest.
around, give everyone hope, and then let them down.
Yeah, not get the scholarship.
Then let them down. Oh.
Yeah, no, I think I had only told my partner. And that was about it. Like I remember there were so many times when I wanted to tell my friends as well, but then I was like, not now. Now is not the right time. And again, I think one big reason was also because I didn't want to get my own hopes up. And I know I would have been pretty devastated if I couldn't go, because it's one thing not being accepted, but if you're accepted and you can't go because you don't have the money to do so, I mean, that would have been very devastating.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people do go through that, which is terrible. So I think that's why I didn't want to get my hopes up.
Yeah, and I think one thing this always shows is seeing the importance of seeing people like yourself who have like been successful and made it into good positions. Because like you said, the girl from Peshawar who got the other scholarship kind of inspired you and motivated you to then apply for this one. So I think, when we were talking about the discussion regarding, should there be quotas in workplaces or something, I think that's an important consideration for that conversation. Like, should you put women in positions of power so that other women can then be inspired and see people like them in those positions and want to do the same? But what was it? So did you have any family here in the UK, any friends, anything when you were moving, or was it just by yourself?
So I think my sister was married a few years ago, and then she moved here. So like nearby, which I think was a big support. But I didn't know anybody at Oxford. So that was yeah. Again, had its pros and cons, I guess. There are quite a few people from Pakistan now at Oxford. There are quite a few people from my undergraduate university as well, which again
really?
tells you a lot about the education system in Pakistan, frankly. But I think that has helped me because it gave me some sense of community.
Yeah, and you said there was a big culture shock going from Peshawar to LUMS. What was the culture shock like going from LUMS to Oxford?
I think when I went to LUMS, I felt like I've seen everything. Like, in Peshawar, I feel like my imagination was very limited in terms of like, in every sense, but also in terms of like what I saw my own future as, and the opportunities that were open to me. So it was very limited, like we just discussed, to become a doctor or an engineer or something of that sort. And you don't see yourself very far away because you don't have those kind of role models as well. That's not the norm. So I think when I went to LUMS, I felt like it just opened up a whole new world for me. Um, but I think coming here, it's been like the same experience again, even though like I thought this time that I was in a good place, but I realized that it's a whole new world basically. And I think it really expands your horizons, like the way you think about the world, the way you think about yourself, the way you think about your future. I think the diversity here is also pretty amazing. At Oxford particularly, I'm not sure that's the case for the undergraduate, but like the postgrad, it's very diverse. Like my own cohort, what I'm studying, that's a very diverse cohort. So there are people from all over the country. There are people of all ages. There are some people who are younger than me, some people who are much older than me. So I think that kind of experience is very enriching in itself.
So what I wanted to ask, like, what advice would you give to like a young Wajiha who aspires to do great things like yourself? What advice would you give her in order to, make it to a university like Oxford or whatever it is, whether she wants to do arts, whether she wants to do whatever subject, right, and do well in it? What advice would you give the young generation?
I don't know if I'm in a place that I should be giving people advice.
I mean, you made it to Oxford. I think that's a huge, huge achievement. I think um, we can be very self-critical and harsh, but what you have done is incredible.
Thank you for saying that. Um, but I feel like, particularly for women, I think my advice would be to pick your fights, but don't go down without a fight. It's very exhausting to fight against a system because for young people in Pakistan, especially for young women, and then especially from a place like Peshawar, I think the system is designed against you. It's not designed for you. Like we discussed, there are a lot of societal pressures as well. So it is honestly, it does get exhausting because you have to fight for everything. If you want anything, you have to fight for it. It doesn't come easily to you. You have to put in more work than others in your position. um, and it is exhausting fighting against that sort of patriarchal society and system, which is why, like, I would say that pick your fights, but then again, don't go down without a fight. Don't settle for less. You have to put in a lot of work, which which is which is difficult at times. But I think at the same time, unfortunately, like you have to put in that extra work. Um, so yeah, I think just don't settle for less. If you want to do something, you should do that. Um, Go follow your dreams, but also like research. So, again, because we don't have that kind of a system, that kind of counseling, we need to figure that stuff out ourselves. But I think, yeah, don't be pressured into going down the conventional paths, whether it's your personal life or whether it's your professional life. Yeah.
And then what are your goals for the future? What do you hope to achieve in around 10, 20 years' time?
I think that's a very difficult question. um, I think um, I think I've been enjoying the kind of field that I'm in and the work that I've been doing. So, for instance, like before coming here as well, I was working with the government of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and I think that was a very good experience for me, and that was something that I enjoyed. And I feel like it was a place where I could maybe make a difference. Um, yeah, so I think I would probably like to stay in the policy field, working with the government, ideally. Not sure, like in the government, with the government, but I do feel like that's a good place where both, like where I might be competent as well, but also like what really interests me. So I think that's somewhere that I'd like to go in the future.
What change is it that you want to see in the world? Because you said that is somewhere where you think you can bring change.
There are so many changes. I think it's hard to pin down, and it's actually like, even I think professionally, it's something that I'm struggling to really narrow down what area I want to work in, because there's so many pressing challenges in a place like Pakistan, Peshawar especially. I wish there was like one thing that I could just say that this is our biggest issue, but there are like so many problems, economic, social, political. So within like policy also, you could work on climate change, climate policy. You could work on urban policy. There are a lot of areas that interest me. So I'm not sure if I have that pinned down yet, but I do know that I want to play my part, whatever that may be, and however small that may be, but just play my part in trying to make lives better for people over there, for women over there. Maybe try to reduce the structural barriers that they face, make their journeys easier for them.
That's amazing.
That's amazing.
And then finally, when people think of Wajeeha, when people think of you, what is the first thing you want to pop into their head?
I think I can't control that anymore, because it's automatically like something related to the academics. So I think like because I was always doing well at school, but then also I think like a big life changing moment was when I got a position in the federal board when I was doing my metric, so which is 10th grade. I think from that point on, it wasn't in my control anymore. Like that's automatically what people think of me, which can also be a little bit difficult at times because there are a lot of expectations. And I think a lot of times people just expect me to do well academically. Like that's just what they expect, even at a place like Oxford. But I think I don't think I control that anymore. I think it's just natural for people to link me with that.
Is that what you want, though? Or would
Well,
there
yeah.
be an ideal for
Like,
you?
what would you want them to think? Like, for example, I could be like, oh, when someone thinks Khushal, kind, for example, right?
Yeah. No, that was actually what I was gonna say. I think over the past few years, especially, I'm increasingly realizing that um, I want to be able to um, ensure that my life is such that my priorities should always be um, to be a nice person, myself, and to also have a nice life, which not necessarily means academically or professionally. I think it's very difficult to get out of that mindset because it's so internalized. Um, and so, like, when we were discussing cultural shocks, for instance, that was one big thing that when I went to LUMS, it felt like a rat race, with everyone trying to get grades, internship, jobs, grad school. Everybody seemed to have their lives figured out, and everybody seemed to be just working mindlessly towards those goals. And that's also like, it's how I became as well for a while, because that's what was just the kind of environment that I was living in. And even now, I think it's very hard to let go, and it's very hard to not associate your personal worth with your grades or with where you are in your career or with your promotion or anything of that sort. But I think what I'm increasingly learning and I'm really, really trying to implement is to not firstly associate my own personal worth with that, but then also like try to just, constantly reminding myself that my priorities in life is not just my career. And I should focus on like becoming a better person myself, and, focusing on my personal relationships, and not just always equating professional success with with success in life and happiness in general. I think again, coming more towards the UK also, I think this is a big problem. um, a lot of times the idea of Western feminism is also just like, the idea of the girl boss, and that you need to be like a successful professional, and that's what feminism means a lot of times. So I think just like trying not to internalize that kind of a thing. And just constantly reminding yourself what your priorities in life are.
That's beautifully put. And I think that's a great point to end the podcast in. Thank you so much for coming on, Wajeeha.
Of course, it was lovely.
Talking to you. We learned so much from you, and wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thank you for listening, guys.